Bilton Grange United Reformed Church, Harrogate, North Yorkshire. It sits where Skipton Road meets Woodfield Road, an unassuming little building, overlooked by many. But this little church has been here a long time. October 2008 marks its 80th anniversary. The story starts in 1906. Thursday, March the 15th, to be precise, just over 100 years ago. This was the day the church, as a congregation, was founded, but it would still be some years before a permanent building came into being. In those days, services were held in what is now the Jehovah's Witness Hall on Skipton Road, not far from the current site. The Reverend W. E. Cargill was in charge in those early days, followed by the Reverend H. Jordan Just, then the Reverend Shackleton. It was he who began the fund for the new church building. At that time it was known as Bilton Grange Congregational Church, the United Reformed Church having not yet been founded.
It's good it was called Bilton. I wonder why they called it, well, no, I shouldn't say that really. Why did they call it Bilton Grange? I mean, this was Bilton Grange School next door. I don't really know that.
When
the club was Bilton Grange School.
All right.
It was a private school, or I'm saying a private school. It
was it a boarding school?
It was like, well, there was loads of schools in Harrogate in those days, and I don't say it was a boarding school. I've got a photograph of it. It's just a pencil drawing somewhere, and it was definitely a school.
All right.
And it was called Bilton Grange. So where the name Bilton Grange came from, because that was all this land here would belong to Samson Fox.
Right.
And I would think up to the school.
Yeah.
You see, so whether it was just called Bilton Grange because the school was there.
Right.
I can see where the Bilton come from, because it's the area Bilton,
yes.
But I don't know about the Grange.
No, why call it Bilton Grange Congregational Church? Because it was. Was
it
called Bilton Grange Congregational?
Yeah, Bilton Cons.
Or was it called just Bilton Cons?
Between 1889 and 1892, the Mayor of Harrogate had been a man by the name of Samson Fox. A philanthropist, made rich by his success as an inventor, he owned much land in and around the area. He built social housing, provided gas street lighting for the town, and gave to the poor and needy. Samson Fox died in 1903, and his land passed to his trustees, including the site chosen for Bilton Grange Congregational Church. The Congregational Church itself was a denomination whose roots can be traced back to the Reformation of the 16th century and the thinking of Martin Luther. This led, in time, to nonconformist churches, like the Presbyterians and the Congregationalists, breaking away from Rome, recognising God as the head of the church, rather than the Pope, and changing the nature of Christian life. Now, salvation came through a personal relationship with God, rather than seeking absolution through earthly agents, such as priests and bishops. These nonconformist churches spread after Henry VIII's shake-up of the church in England broke Rome's hold over the country. They survived through the English Civil War and have seen many hard times. This has led to a history of Christianity in Britain, which is long and complex. By the 19th century, there were many settled denominations in the country, high churches like the Roman Catholics and the Church of England, and nonconformists like the Congregationalists and the Presbyterians, the Baptists and the Methodists, all battling over believers and what was the right and proper way to be a Christian. Sadly, numbers have dwindled in all churches over the last 150 years, and, to survive, many smaller denominations have had to join forces. This led to the Congregational Church joining the Presbyterians in 1972 to form the United Reformed Church we know today. They were also joined by the Churches of Christ in 1981 and the Scottish Congregationalists in 2000. This new denomination took elements from the practices of its founding members and combined them as best it could. This led to a simple system of practice and belief, based on scripture and personal discipleship.
We are utterly privileged in our approach to God and to Jesus and the Spirit, because we come from a tradition of being non-conformist and Protestant, and it's our privilege to have a voice. We haven't got somebody who stands up the front there and tells us what we ought to think. We haven't got somebody in Rome or in Westminster telling us what we ought to think. And it's been absolutely fascinating this last week about the Archbishop of Canterbury and his views about Sharia law and the furore that's caused. And you sort of think, well, yes, he should say those things. You don't have to agree with him. But he said it's opening it up for debate. Yes, let us open it up for debate. I happen to believe that the only way to God is through Christ. But other people have got other views. You have to respect those. But I can have my say the same as they can.
But back to our story. At the beginning of the 20th century, the Reverend Arthur Cook Hill became minister of Victoria Avenue Congregational Church, now West Park URC, and heralded in a period of growth and expansion, which reflected the growth of Harrogate as a whole. One of the most noticeable elements being the founding of a branch church to accommodate the expanding congregation. This was to become Bilton Grange. By 1907, Bilton Grange's membership numbered 58, with up to 120 people attending evening services. In 1919, a building fund was established, aided by a generous gift from Victoria Avenue's 20th Century Fund. A year later, a mission hut was bought for £300 for the site at the top of Woodfield Road. However, permission to erect it was denied by Sampson Fox's trustees, and it had to be sold again. Funding in those early days involved sowing teas, jumble sales, and sales of work. There were also regular 3-day bazaars. September 1925 saw the arrival of the Reverend J.S. Hainstock, and 6 months later plans for the new building were made. The foundation stone was laid on March the 18th, 1928, by Alderman William Roth, who had been Mayor of Harrogate in 1922 and would later become Senior Deacon at Bilton Grange. The building was opened on October the 11th that same year. At that time, the pulpit was in the centre, a position it would return to much later. There were also choir stalls facing the congregation, and music was provided by a harmonium. In May 1933, Reverend Hainstock left the church, to be replaced by the Reverend H. Derbyshire. He took up residence at 55 Bilton Grove Avenue, which had been bought by a member and let out to the church as a manse. One of the first things to happen, while Reverend Derbyshire was minister, was the installation of the stained glass window at the front of church. It was provided by Mrs. McCourt in memory of her late husband, Robert.
Well, I first came to Bilton Grange through my dad, really, because he was a member at Bilton Grange, but my mother was Methodist.
Right.
And it was the congregational minister, Mr. Derbyshire, who visited her.
Right.
So she changed her allegiance and became a congregationalist. And that was in the time of Mr. Derbyshire.
Right. Now, how old had you been there?
Oh, it was from being born,
Right.
actually, yeah. Yeah, so that would be 1939. Yeah. I think a very, very vague memory is of being taken to Sunday school by Anne Derbyshire, Mr. Derbyshire's daughter, and then running home. I don't think I want it to be there, but it's a very, very vague memory. Yeah.
And it was less than 3 years later that the pipe organ was purchased. Arriving second-hand from a firm in York, it was dedicated in January 1936. During this period, the first Rose Queen was elected, and this would become a regular summer event for many years.
I gave the mayoress a bouquet when the Rose Queen was here a few years ago. Well, more than a few years ago. It must have been about 3. I've got some photos of
1900s, didn't it, Gary?
Stop it. I'm not as old as you. When they used to have a Rose Queen every year, and they had the mayor and the mayoress opened it. So I've got some photos of me about 3 years old outside giving a bouquet.
That'd be nice, wouldn't it? That'd be
Yes,
nice
I had
doing
a ride on a horse.
In 1945, the Reverend C.W. Wall arrived to fill the gap left by the departing Reverend Derbyshire. Reverend Wall served Bilton Grange for 11 years, and this busy period saw further expansion to the church. It included the building of the manse at 1 Woodfield Road and the construction of a small schoolroom. This was built on the site of the tennis courts adjacent to the church, which had been used by the church's sports club for some years.
I was very impressed by the preaching of Reverend Wilf Wall.
Right.
And became very interested in another side of his ministry, which was psychotherapy.
Right.
And he ran a few, he gave a few talks about psychotherapy based on a book that he wrote, The Value of Neurosis. And I got my dad to go along to that as well.
Right.
We both went, and they were very interesting. He had an act that would go into a sort of review,
right.
And it was hypnosis.
All right.
I remember him hypnotising suggestible subjects from the audience. He found those out, but we had to put our hands on our heads. And then he would count up to 3 or something and then say, now you won't be able to take your hands down. Well, most of us could, but some of us couldn't. You know, and those were the good subjects for hypnosis. So they went up on the stage and he got them to do silly things.
Yeah,
I remember Sally, the girl I was interested in, he got her to regress to being 3 or 4 year old and to sing a song. And she sang it like a little girl, you know, with a little girl's voice.
Mr. Wall was, he had a great character, a great understanding of people. And he knew when to encourage. And although he was only part-time really at Bilton, because he had another job as well, he was a psychoanalyst, and he used to do that professionally. I don't think there was any event that went on at church that he didn't pop his head in. If it was just a matter of popping his head in and saying, how are you? And that made a profound effect on us, I think. But he preached super sermons, and a very encouraging person. And he had a big following, and I think the church declined a bit when he left.
Also, the pulpit was moved for the first time, from the centre to the right-hand side of the church. This is where it would stay for a long time, making way for the wood panelling which was installed at the front in 1952, at the same time as the wrought iron gates. The manse and small schoolroom were opened in early 1954. This was a year that also saw the Young Wives meetings begin. In time, the Young Wives would become the Ladies' Fellowship, an organisation whose continued presence at the church has supported and shaped much of Bilton Grange's social life.
Well, I wasn't there at the beginning.
No, I wasn't there at the beginning.
Because I was working. But they used to have it in the...
Young Wives it started off as, didn't it?
Yes, Young Wives
I
Club.
think Brenda should have more history about it.
Yeah.
She got Mary's books.
Yes. There was the Women's Guild on the Monday afternoon, wasn't there?
And then the Ladies' Fellowship,
Which I think, did they start it as being an afternoon thing?
it started when as Mothers and Wives was in the afternoon.
And bring the children then.
And then it was ladies' fellowship, and it changed to evening.
And then, of course, nobody wanted to go out at night, and it dwindled, so we started it on a Monday morning. And we seem to keep up the numbers, don't we?
Yes, we
Yes,
do.
and get
Pretty
new
good.
people.
We've just got
Yeah.
3 new members in recently, just before Christmas.
Thinking about changes, Ladies' Fellowship, well, they're still going ever so strong,
Yes.
getting new
We
members.
must have about 19 now. If
Yeah,
everybody comes.
if everybody came.
Short of
But
20.
they used to be on Tuesday night,
Yes.
and then when they didn't like coming out, we moved to a Monday morning. I think that has made it successful.
Yes, because people, older people don't like coming out on a night if they've got nobody to bring them.
Yeah.
You know. So that's
a continual presence
Yes,
in the
yeah.
church.
No, we still provide refreshments for the
Garden party and Christmas fair. And
railway club and things like that.
yeah, and Brenda does catering for other things here. Which it's normally Ladies' Fellowship that help, isn't it? We have one coffee morning, a charity coffee morning once a year for different charities.
We have a local charity,
Yeah,
is our main aim
Yeah.
for that. But also we support this macaroni, I call it.
Macmillan.
What do they call, no, what do they call the macaroni? Marrock.
Oh, the thing that
Marrakesh.
Brenda's friend has.
Macaroni. We support that as well.
Yeah.
Now, so we support one local and we choose a different one every year, local.
Yeah.
And this year it's Liston Knowles.
Well, I mean, we've had a sort of a lot of new people come in and a lot of younger people, which is smashing. Some of them have left us and gone into the ministry themselves, but I feel personally that it's nice to have something to keep the older people so that they don't think, well, they've been pushed on one side. I think it's nice for them to, you know.
Yeah.
Mary Coe seemed to be the one who was running the Ladies' Fellowship from behind, some sort of, going to do something. We better ask Mary Coe and check it with Frank and make sure that that's okay. And because this old battalion of people that nobody dared do anything without asking somebody for whom it was their thing. Oh, can we do such and such? Oh, can we have the hall on such a night? Oh, we better ask so and so because that's their something night. The Sunday School, later to become the Junior Church, is one of the few other groups at Bilton Grange to have had a continual presence there. In 1956, during the ministry of the Reverend Ken Walters, Sunday scholars won the Shield at the Scripture exam, with 5 of them achieving 100 marks. A first.
At the beginning, we had a big Sunday school at one time. I remember we had they used to have to send up to, I think it probably to do with the Scripture exam, of how many pupils we had, and we had 140 at one time. Wow. Yes, and we used to have
That was with Sunday, wasn't it?
With Sunday, yes.
Sunday we used to meet at the Royal Hall.
Yes, and there was a shield given to the church that had the highest number of marks in the Scripture exam. I don't know whether we ever got it, but we did do quite well.
Well, it started, I was about 8, I think, when I took it first. And my mum used to coach, if you like, if that's the right word. It was very, very successful. We took the shield off Killingall Methodist. They'd had it for 13 years, and the results were always very good. But then I suppose we outgrew it as we got older, because there were quite older children took it as well.
Right.
So I suppose we grew out of it.
In 1961, Reverend Max Moore became minister and preached for 9 years. During his ministry, Bilton Grange became part of a joint pastorate with Knaresborough URC, with the Reverend Moore preaching at both churches.
show you who christened me. I can't remember his name offhand. It's the one after Mr. Wall. He actually christened me. Then the one I actually remember most is Max Moore.
Right.
And I still, when I ring him to book, I still say, "Hello, Uncle Max, are you going to come and preach for us?" So makes him laugh.
I remember we had a concert on the night that the American president was shot.
Kennedy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And from Pickering. From Pickering, what the Max Moore. He grew a beard because he was going in to be a player playing Jesus.
Right.
And he grew a beard. When he came visiting me in the hospital, there's Mrs. Madden, Jesus man coming again. Which always struck me.
It was also during Max Moore's stay that the 3 stained glass windows at the back of the church were installed. The theme chosen for the windows was service, an important pillar in the philosophy of the Congregational and indeed United Reformed Church. The central window shows Jesus washing his disciples' feet and bears the quotation from Luke 22, "I am among you as one who serves." The left-hand window depicts Lydia, a seller of purple cloth, who appears in chapter 16 of the Acts of the Apostles. In the Bible story, she is converted while listening to Paul, Silas and Timothy talking to a group of women in Macedonia. She offers her house in Philippi to them as a place to stay, and her whole household is converted. This may have been the beginnings of the church there. She is also Paul's first European convert. On the right-hand window, we see depicted German missionary Albert Schweitzer, born 1875. A prolific writer, Christian philosopher, and expert on the music of Bach, he received the call to be a missionary in Africa while in his 20s and principal at a theological college. After being refused by a French Roman Catholic mission because of his Lutheran theology, he went on to study medicine. Although he had no previous interest in it, doctors were sorely needed in Africa, and Albert Schweitzer believed the best form of mission was through practical works rather than preaching. In 1913, after graduating, he established a hospital near the Ogowe River in what is now Gabon. This was done at his own expense, and he lived and worked there for many years with his wife. It was there he developed his philosophy of reverence for life. His later life involved working and speaking against the development of nuclear weapons with Albert Einstein and Bertrand Russell. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1952 for his work, and died 13 years later. This was 3 years before the installation of the windows at Bilton Grange, and might go some way to explaining his presence there. The next minister, arriving in 1970, was the Reverend George Courtney, who saw Bilton Grange change from being a Congregational to a United Reformed Church. The joining of the Congregationalists with the Presbyterians in 1972 was the first time since the Reformation that 2 separate denominations had come together like this, the result being the URC.
She used to seem to cook for the unmarried ministers, didn't she?
Yes, yeah.
They seemed to.
And Elsa, when George Courtney came, he came straight from university, well, straight from the college, and of course he wasn't married then, and he went in the manse, and Elsa used to look after him, and she used to clean the church and that at one time, and then the ladies took it over.
Much difference between how it was organised then and how the URC is now?
Yes, there's some quite important. I mean, most people wouldn't see them on the surface, but the fact that the buildings and property are held in joint ownership by the local congregation and by the synod.
Right.
You see. Whereas in congregational days, the local church owned the property and appointed trustees to stand for the property. But now there's this joint ownership, and if the local church wants to do anything like altering buildings or adding to the buildings, they have to have the agreement of the synod.
Right. George Courtney was to see the first of the popular candlelight carol services, which have continued to the present day.
We always have a good time at Christmas with all the Christmas things that go on. They do very well for that, all this lighting the candles and putting them up and everything. It's very good. It's a given time.
The candlelit carol service, definitely the Christmas events are just very special in my heart anyway. They always have been.
Well, the candlelight carol service again was a great effort on a lot of people, especially when we sort of really lit it up, and you know, and it's something that's, you can say it's sentimental, but it starts Christmas, and if it's done well, it is something that attracts those who are on the fringe. And if you get people who are into the church, because people are fearful of coming through that door, whatever church door it is. But if you get people in and they enjoy the service, and I don't mean we to perform an entertainment, I don't mean that, but if they have a good experience, perhaps is better than saying enjoy, then they do tend to see the church in a different light. And I think that the candlelight carol service is certainly one of those, definitely. That you could do that with.
I love the candlelight carol service. I love that. And the nativity service. You're nearly tearing your hair out, and if it goes bad the week before, we know we're all right for the day, because it never ever flows smoothly if it's going to be okay on the day. But those two services particularly, and
I think we do like those, the candlelight carol service.
Yes, we do love the
We
Christmas.
think that's special.
To me, that's Christmas, it really is. Yeah.
It's not the same if we don't. Well, we've never missed it, have we?
No, we haven't. No.
The candlelight carol service is just beautiful.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and you know, we're almost full, but can get another 20.
Well,
30,
the first time we came to one, which was when we first came to this church, we were putting more chairs out down here.
Absolutely.
We had to go and get more chairs for people. It was just so packed.
Yes, I wish. I wish our little church and all little churches were as full the rest of the year as they are when you have your candlelit service. But I think people don't know what they miss.
The Reverend Roy Lowe's ministry, beginning in 1978, saw the Sunday school redecorated and the church paths concreted, as well as the donation of the gates on Woodfield Road.
And Ambrose Lowe's. She's the only minister's wife that we've had that's got into her overalls and helped us to spring, because we used to spring clean, didn't we?
Oh yeah.
Wash the walls down.
We used to,
wash the cupboards out.
So I just happened upon Bilton Grange URC one morning, and I sat at the back because beside a little lady called Josie Carrick. And as it would turn out that morning, it was the Reverend Roy Lowe's that was in charge at the time. And that particular morning, for whatever reason, he had decided to introduce all the staff, as it were, of the church to the congregation. And he brought them all out one after the other, and I felt as though I was being introduced. I'm sure I wasn't. I think it was just a fluke, but they all come out one after the other, and immediately I knew the minister and I knew all of his elders and the rest of the people of the church straight away. And,
the innkeeper.
When were you involved with that? Do you remember that bit?
Vaguely, but I might be
It
quite
was
involved.
Roy Lowe's. We were grown-ups that had to dress up, but act as though we were children.
Right.
And it was Roy Lowe's.
He was the innkeeper, wasn't he?
No.
Was he Joseph? Well, I know, what do you call his wife?
He was Joseph, I think, Avril.
Avril was the angel Gabriel.
Bernard Hall was the, oh no, what was he?
He must have
He
been
was the
Joseph. He
innkeeper.
must have been Joseph, Roy, because he could... Innkeeper! Innkeeper!
Yeah.
The times we had to,
Wendy
we had
Hall
to
was King
practice it,
Herod.
we could do nothing but laugh. Absolute hysterics, weren't we?
Fighting over toy lambs.
Anyway, it worked out all right.
In 1984, the Ladies' Fellowship celebrated its 30th anniversary with a party. The next minister welcomed to Bilton Grange would be its shortest serving. Norman Setchell arrived in 1984 and stayed only 2 years.
Well, I was in the army, and I was an army chaplain, and I came out from the army, and when I was in up in Catterick, and so we're in Yorkshire at the time, and so what happened was I was looking around for a post, and I was unsure whether to come out at the time or not, but I decided to come out. Rebecca was very young. I'd just come back from the Falkland Islands after the conflict. And I came to Bilton and Knaresborough, and I had inquiries to the church, and I was just very attracted by the whole area of Harrogate anyway, and instantly the people at both churches really made very welcome. And so I think it was that. At first I wasn't sure about living next door to the church, and I think as time went on I did occasionally find I was being almost a bit of a janitor there. People were calling and knocking on the door at all hours, you know, if the boiler broke.
Here, he remembers how it was coming to a new church.
I think so. I mean, Roy had a sort of character, not in some ways dissimilar to myself, but I think he spent a lot of time with Knaresborough, particularly as well. But I think he was very popular, and since I've seen him not so long ago, actually, he's always been very involved in educational issues, and I know he was quite creative at the time with things. But then you're always anxious when you're coming to take over from someone, you know. And bearing in mind that I'd been in the army, in the armed forces, and trying to get used again to a pastoral ministry wasn't easy. I suppose if you think of churches, many churches now, I suppose it seemed to be quite traditional, what we call a hymn sandwich, you know, people would, but there was a small choir, and the small choir of ladies who sang in the choir, and a couple of men as well, and Marion was secretary, a lady called Marion, and the service was fairly traditional, with a short talk to any children, and then the main sermon. But the children numbers are very small, and this was the problem, I think. In the days when we had, the church first arrived, everything was quite traditional. I mean, we used to wear robes, and I used to wear the full robes and everything. But most ministers now, many churches don't. I mean, they adapted really a lot, you know.
Yeah.
I remember playing I think I played a guitar there and things like that occasionally.
Yeah.
And I had drums, which I was clattering up the hallway in the church.
Norman left his drum kit in the passage there, didn't he, on the way to the kitchen, and it was always in the way.
Everywhere you wanted to be.
He was that blooming drum kit. Do you remember that?
No, I think I was too
small, were you?
Yeah.
This blooming drum kit. Yeah.
So the service was fairly traditional, but the problem was that I had to make this dash from one church to the other. So that I'd always arrive, you know, like a mighty rushing wind, really, and come into the back and then just about get there in time for the start of the service.
This was a period that saw the founding of the 2nd Harrogate Boys Brigade Company at the church. Of course, there was the Boys Brigade as well. That was a thing I started. I was about 6 or 7 or something, and I remember very well the first night when they were kind of like recruiting for the very first time, and Mum took me up to the church, and there were tables laid out, and Jean Towers telling me that she was going to be the captain, and she said, "I'm going to be your captain," because everybody seemed to have already decided that I was going. Nobody bothered to ask me.
The next thing I set out to do, I think, really was to try to encourage to do something about the young people.
Right.
And that's when I thought about the Boys Brigade.
Yes. That was one of the things I was first involved with, really.
Yes, well, you were. You were. In fact, I remember you and your mum and dad and you were enthusiastic, because what we did was we advertised outside, the elders and the church agreed. We advertised outside locally for somebody to come forward.
Right.
And someone came forward a lady came forward as a BB captain.
It would be Jean Towers.
Yes, yeah. And she came forward and volunteered, and actually within a very short space of time, which I'm still proud of today regarding Bilton Grange, with the help and support of some of the members there very much, we started this company, and soon we had the uniforms, as you probably remember.
Yeah.
And it was going, and I was very sad to leave it, because it was really beginning to take off.
Boys Brigade, yes. We had Joan Robinson. She came to help with her husband now and again, but he was more involved with Starbeck and Boys Brigade. But there was little Jean Towes. Well, Jean Towes used to do the Anchor Boys, and she called them her weenies. She always referred to them as her weenies. And we were all really, really fond of Jean. She's gone now, bless her, but she was lovely. But we went to various things. We went to competitions at Scarborough and away, big conventions, things like that, where we all get dressed up and look our best.
And the 1986 Bilton Gala saw Bilton Grange Junior Church win third prize with their decorated float.
And I can remember Vincent's mum when he had a float at Bilton Gala.
Oh, yeah,
we
she
had
fell
a
off
float.
then,
She
didn't
fell off back. Literally fell off a lorry. But, I mean, she wasn't hurt. She was all right. Off back of a lorry.
Yes. When the Bilton Gala, we have the Bilton Gala. Every minister, I think, that comes thinks, "Oh, Bilton Gala, that's a great thing. It's a good vehicle for advertising our church, raising its profile, and bringing it to the forefront. Some sort of big thing there." So Norman Setchell, when he was here, had organised for us a float, for the church. And we were going to put 2 pews on the float and have the children sitting on them. And we had a great big banner that Janet Horrocks, who was the church secretary at the time, and myself held up. And I remember having my blue raincoat on and my wellies standing on this, because it was actually a coal lorry, and it was very dirty. Although they'd scrubbed it as well as they could, it was really quite dirty, and so we were standing up there. And the gentleman that was driving it obviously wasn't used to driving it. So we were going round on this float, and we stopped at the end of Poplar Way on Poplar Grove, because there was a bit of a jam further up the road. And we'd been stopped for quite some time, and we were giving away balloons to people, And I saw my next door neighbour and her little boy, and I sort of stood forward on the back of the lorry and just as I was handing a balloon to him, they decided to move off. And I believe there was a sticky clutch on this lorry, and the chap wasn't used to it, and it jerked away, and I went head first off the back. So yes, you could say I fell off the back of a lorry.
While the youth of the church prospered, with the Boys Brigade and the Youth Fellowship, who had won the five-a-side football trophy at the 1986 Provincial Day, the rest of the church was in grave trouble. Attendance was low, and money was running short. In time, things became so bad that Bilton Grange United Reformed Church could no longer afford to keep its minister, and that August the Reverend Norman Setchell had to leave.
But I loved Yorkshire very much, and I was very sad at the time to leave it, really, because it was, but that's part of ministry. But part of ministry is being peripatetic. It's having to move very often for all sorts of reasons. And it was a shame, really, that the finances were part of the problem, but it's what happens.
I think we've all pulled together when we've been without a minister.
Yeah. And after
we've all pulled together and kept the place going.
After we left, Norman Setchell left, I mean, we were really down to, rock bottom then, with no money or anything. We're just about bankrupt. But everybody seemed to pull together, and we finished up with about £20,000, didn't we?
We only had enough money to keep the church up for 6 weeks, didn't we?
Yes, yeah.
When you left.
Yeah.
I can remember, and I can't remember whether I was an elder then, I don't think I was, saying we're going to have to let the minister go because we just can't afford to keep him. And I think
That was when the doors were made. Yeah.
We can't afford to keep him because at that time didn't the church pay him his salary from the money that came into the church? It didn't go from head office, did it?
Since leaving Bilton, Norman Setchell, now working in and around Margate, has had a varied career.
I went down to London for a while in Twickenham, and then I was at Cambridge, in a church in Cambridge. Went back to a church because I was at Westminster College, Cambridge originally. And then I took a post with the British and International Sailors Society in the port of Antwerp in Belgium. So I went to do that, and I carried on with the army work as a TA major as well for a while. So I was juggling all these different things, doing part-time hospital chaplaincy. I got more and more involved in music, writing a lot of Christian songs and working with different musicians and things. That carried on and still does. Then I came back from Belgium to Dover, and from Dover, where I had 3 churches, and then I was very much involved with, at that stage, from 1993 onwards, I was very much involved with refugees, asylum seekers. And I wrote some publications, and I did a huge amount of work. I opened the church up for that. And then from Dover I moved to where I am now as a hospital chaplain at Margate, and then I retire next year. But it's been quite a varied, busy ministry. I have moved around quite a lot.
On leaving, the Reverend Setchell was presented with a wooden crucifix, an item he had previously never had. It now hangs in his office and has travelled with him everywhere he has been. Another blow to the church was in March 1987, when the joint pastorate with Knaresborough URC dissolved after 20 years. Knaresborough feeling it was best if they sought their own minister. This left Bilton Grange in a difficult situation, as it was unlikely that it could survive on its own without a minister. However, help was at hand in the form of Victoria Avenue URC. Bilton found itself returning to a relationship with the church that had founded it. 4 elders from Victoria Avenue were seconded to Bilton by the District Council to help with the running of the church, and that October a report was presented outlining a possible joint pastorate between the two. This was adopted in September 1988. One of the elders sent to assist Bilton Grange was Mr. Mike Garnett.
Well, for many years Bilton Grange had been in a joint pastorate with Knaresborough URC. They were sharing a minister. Sadly, in the early 1980s, Bilton's financial position was worsening for some time, and eventually in 1985 it got to the point they were virtually going out of business and couldn't pay their commitments. So something had to be done, and they appealed to the district for urgent help. Perhaps understandably, the district can't react immediately. So the church secretary at the time, Marion Jones, came up to West Park to plea for help so that something could be done to rescue the situation. And West Park immediately responded by sending 4 elders down there to see what could be done to address the position urgently. And the position did turn around through, thanks to a lot of very hard work by the members and elders at Bilton. And it was hard work. But the position was saved. The result then was, what are we going to do about the future? First thing was to produce a proper financial plan with a budget and to stick to that budget and make sure that it worked. It did work. The upshot of all of that was that a working party was established with the chairmanship of John Belderson from district, the 4 of our elders and the 3 from Bilton. Sadly, Bob Charters died of cancer. So the 6 of us got on with John Belderson and eventually formed a joint pastorate with Bilton to look at the future of the 2 churches together, sharing a minister from here.
In time, Bilton once again found its feet, paid off its debt, and displayed that resilience that so typified the church.
Well, I think it might have been harder years ago before I came to the church. I think with talking to the older people in the church, I think it was harder for them now. But I think we've got a lot of people with a lot of strength and a lot of good leadership skills. And I think that on the whole, we've pulled through really well and we've kept things going. There have been negative times when we've all felt a little bit low. But on the whole, I think we've come through very well.
I just think that they've got a wonderful legacy here of people. I mean, I remember when I first came, the Harvest Festival services. George Bryce used to break the great big, well, you remember them as well, but used to break the great big breads and things like that. And they've got, and Frank and Mary Coe served this church selflessly for so many years. But there are so many people, the Brendas, Eileen, Margaret, there are lots and lots of people. And I just think they've got a wonderful, it's nice to have known all those people really, to see what, because they did a huge amount really. And there wasn't a lot of them, but without them, there wouldn't be anything really here anyway, so.
I think one of our strengths is we try hard. We've even in adversity, we try and keep going and we try and bring new people into the church to know Christ. And that's what we want to do, even though we find it very difficult. But I think that's our weakness because we haven't got the resources or the people to do it. So I think that's a strength and a weakness.
We really have, you know, I don't realise until you stop and think about it like that, we really have pulled together whatever is suggested.
Yes.
Everybody rallies round and helps.
Yes, people have, you have your grumbles, but you still, it gets done and, you know, it's done in a good spirit, isn't it?
Yeah.
A new era for the church began in 1991, when the Reverend Richard Case was appointed minister for the Bilton Grange and newly renamed West Park Joint Pastorate.
Well, when I retired from Christian Aid, we had our office, our Christian Aid office at West Park, and they asked me would I consider being the ministers there. Then I discovered after it was agreed that Bilton Grange was involved as well. So I had the 2 churches to look after. And I rather enjoyed it. It meant taking 2 services each Sunday morning, 9:30 to 10:30 at Bilton, and then 11 o'clock to 12 at West Park. But yes, that's the way it happened. Well, it was the smallest church I'd ever had. But I knew the history a little because when I was with Christian Aid, I used to preach in Bilton now and again. I was always amazed that the pulpit seemed to be some of the folk there, like the Brendas and the Coes. And I think they'd suffered a little bit through irregular ministry.
Yeah.
And so I knew it wasn't going to be too easy, but there were those, they had old-fashioned ideas. It was their safety zone. They liked what they could handle. And so making changes was not going to be easy. But they turned out to be very supportive and very loyal.
Like Norman Setchell before him, Reverend Case had to cope with the demands of preaching at 2 churches.
It was a bigger church, and unfortunately I had to leave Bilton at 20 to 11 every Sunday. So I didn't have time to stay and go to the coffee room and chat to people. And some of them thought, oh, we can't wait to get to West Park. That wasn't the case. I had to go there, be there for 10 to prepare for the service. And I felt it needed that continuity of ministry. And if you had different preachers every week, the church wouldn't grow. It's quite interesting for the faithful, the sermon tasters, but it wasn't going to enlarge the congregation at all. Yes, we tried to change the materials and improve the spiritual life. I tried to make them Sunday morning services attractive and interesting, and we got good congregation for a while.
Yeah, because there always seemed to be quite a difference between West Park, the big town centre church, and Bilton.
In a sense, but I virtually preached the same sermon. Once I'd been to Bilton, but I used to say I'd take my teeth out for Bilton so they wouldn't recognise the sermon. But no, it was a different. West Park, I suppose, was a bit more sophisticated. Bilton was always like a mission church to me. But they both were close to my heart, and I just tried to adapt to suit them.
Many new people started attending the church at this time, something it desperately needed. Of those who came, some were naturally attracted by the presence of Richard Case, who already had a long-standing reputation as a charismatic preacher. However, larger forces were at work, and many of the newcomers knew little or nothing of Richard, and were drawn to Bilton for other reasons.
Well, there was quite a large group of us at that time, including Frank and Pauline and Helga and myself, and quite a number of others looking for somewhere else because we weren't happy at St John's. So we'd been touring around for probably about 4 or 5 months when we came here, and it just felt right as soon as we came, really.
Yeah. I don't know whether you know, but I worshipped at St John's in the Anglican Church for about 16 years before I went to Bilton. And it was a time when Frank, my husband at the time, had just come to faith, and he felt that he wasn't at the right church. I was beginning to think God was moving me, and why I had no idea. And then we started looking around churches, and we went to various churches, Anglican churches as well as other denominations. And I got away with it because at the time it was the year I was the president of Council of Churches in Harrogate. And so people would say, oh, she's visiting, you know, it's as the president of Council of Churches, but in actual fact I was looking to see whether we should go to another church. And then it was the ladies' weekend at Bilton, and they'd asked me to speak for that weekend as the president of Council of Churches, so I did. And Frank came with me, and we both said, there's something about this place. So I said, well, we can't make a decision on that, we have to go back and go and worship, and that's what we did. And then we said, this is the place. And once we moved, it felt very peaceful. I mean, I went to talk to Don, who was the vicar at St John's, because we didn't have any grievance with them or anything. It was just that it was the time to move. And what I found out later, only a few weeks later, was Richard was actually praying for workers to come into the harvest, because of course a lot of people were older, weren't they, in Milton? And being very faithful workers. But of course you needed some energy in a sense to come in. So whether that was the reason, I don't know, but at least that's what happened.
I was trying to work this out, and I think Gareth would have been about 3.5, so that would have been about 1990.
Right.
1991, I would imagine. Just literally after Richard Kay started.
Ah, yes.
So was that about 1990?
Yeah, that was 1990, yeah.
Yeah, so we came just a little while after Richard Kay arrived. Yes, I think we were all sort of fairly dissatisfied in the churches where we were at, for various reasons. And Richard Kay was here, and we knew that he was an excellent preacher, and we sort of came along really.
Yeah.
And for me, it was other reasons why I left the Anglican Church.
Decided that we'd come because David had said that there was a minister here that was...
Richard.
It was Richard.
Richard Kay.
Yes, and so we came, and Richard said to us when we were leaving, have you come to slum it or something, didn't he? And
Have you come to slum it?
something like that. But everybody was so friendly when we went for tea and coffee, you know, people were talking to us straight away. We weren't left on our own.
No.
And
Big Frank come and sat with us, didn't he? Frank Burke.
yes. And there was David and Georgina Brotherton, and there was Pat and David, and there was a lot of people. We just felt that it was very friendly, and we decided we'd like to come here.
Yeah, and I just felt like it was like coming home.
Well, I'm Norma.
And I'm David.
Trotter. I joined the church about 91 to 92, I'm not quite sure when. I hadn't been to church about 11 months, and David and Jenny Hardcastle, I bumped into them at work and said, "Where are you going?" And just come here, and I walked in the door. I thought, oh, it's like home, and I was happy. It's different to what I was used to, because I'm used to what was used to think very relaxed. This is very formal for me, but I regard it now as my church family.
This drawing together of new people to Bilton Grange created an energy that propelled the church forwards. The long-standing members of the church, who had worked hard to keep it afloat through the lean times and had seen previous highs and lows, welcomed the newcomers, and for the most part everyone worked well together. But, as with all endeavours, there was occasional friction. Richard Kay instigated many changes, and those often divided the church. Those who had nursed Bilton Grange through the hard times saw what they had managed to preserve under threat. What they were comfortable with was being changed, the routines shaken up.
I can remember the surprise in the church meeting when I said, "Now we haven't really got a choir, we've just got 3 old people sitting at the front and singing." Oh dear. They weren't very keen on that. And Mary Cole got up to walk out. I said, "Mary, please don't go. Please stay." I was a new broom.
Yes.
Perhaps I was unwise, I don't know. But that's what I said. And the organist, you see, was, so slow. And people used to laugh at his playing, so he had to be, changed. And some decision had to be made. And I'm not saying every decision I made was right. I don't know, we're all prone to make mistakes. But if you don't do anything, you don't make any mistakes, do you? We got there. And,
people like, I know it's Richard, a wonderful man, but also a bit of a, almost a dictator really. But I don't think that's a bad thing, because I think most people need to be given direction, and that's where a minister, I think, comes into his own. If he has a vision for a church and he knows what he's doing, then he will tell people, "I want you to do this, I want you to do that." Whereas if you've got no one actually giving out that kind of instruction, people say, "Well, I want to do this, I want to do that," and it very soon falls apart really. I mean, how many ministers do you know would come into a church and in the first 6 months sack the choir, sack the organist, move the pulpit? And Richard did all that because he really had a vision and he was driving the bus, and I think that's great. He didn't always agree with his decisions, and sometimes you had to rein him in terms of when I became an elder after a year or two. You found yourself you had to disagree because sometimes he would just try and steamroll you.
You had a lot to answer for, Richard Kay.
Yeah.
A lot to answer for. I'm told that there's damage done to that beam where it moved the...
One change that elicited a strong response at the time was the moving of the pulpit. From its position at the right-hand side of the church, it was moved back to the centre, its original position.
So they were reluctant to change. I felt it was necessary for some things to change. I mean, the pulpit was ridiculous, because before I became the minister, I used to go and preach there. And you're preaching, and the front row people are looking that way. You know, and I thought, well, that can't. As soon as we got permission from the elders, reluctantly given, the pulpit was moved. That was a great occasion. Yes. You know, sticking it up on blocks and what have you.
Chairs. But the pulpit was at the right-hand side and quite high up, but it was nice because they were sort of closer, the ministers were closer to the congregation. The only problem was, if we had a wedding, getting the bride and bridegroom past it to go outside to sign the register. And now the pulpit was changed from the right-hand side to the centre, which I didn't like at all. And the minister who wanted it changing
really high
didn't like it either,
yeah,
because it was too high and too far away.
Yeah.
So now we've cut it in half, sort of thing, and put it to the left-hand side, and it does get used. And it's a beautiful piece of furniture, so it needs using.
On December the 28th, 1991, Mrs. Dent celebrated her 100th birthday. She had been involved with Bilton Grange since its inception, and was known and loved by everyone in the church. As the church's oldest and longest serving member, she cut the cake at the Diamond Jubilee in 1988. She passed away in 1992, aged 101. The 5th Bilton Brownie Pack was established at the church in 1993, and has continued to grow ever since, being joined in 2001 by the 2nd Bilton Rainbows, who moved to the church after being made homeless when Fountains Hall closed.
Absolutely, that's one of our goals, was to bring children into the church, and with these different activities that we're starting to generate in the church that are youth-centered, I think they're attracted. Young families are beginning to come to the church.
Absolutely brilliant. If there's a day when I'm poorly and I can't come, my children will say to me, are we still going to church? Are we still going? And they'll make sure that I ring up my mum or someone else that can bring them. Because now it's part of it's just like an everyday thing, like going to school. Yeah. They love coming here now.
And you think they get what they need?
Yeah, definitely. And they know more things about Jesus and things now. They'll be the first to put the hand up at school and class and things and answer all the questions.
1994 was a big year for the church. It saw the biggest change to the building since 1954 and the opening of the small schoolroom and manse. This time it was an extension to the main hall, the creation of a new kitchen and a new office that served as elders' vestry. Also, the toilets were relocated to the area of the old kitchen, freeing up storage space at the bottom of the hall. This was a huge undertaking for Bilton Grange URC, and required its members to pull together.
Huge events, of course, was the extension. There was a lot of work going into that. David Williams and Frank Parkin, and of course Richard was there, leading us up. We had a brick appeal where we had, I can't remember how many thousand bricks picture on the wall, where it was sell a brick for £1, and people would give you £1 and we would cover this huge, great big chart on the wall, which was sectioned off into bricks, and we would cover one until the whole thing was covered up. I think that brought us in about £1,000 in bricks. But we did all sorts of things to make money for it,
Believe it or not, I actually instigated the building of the little extension that we had, and I coordinated the building of that too, and all the paint that was provided for painting it I got through ICI, so volunteer. No, well, I don't know if the volunteer is the right word really, because Richard had a way of getting you to volunteer. His manner was in such a way that he'd ask you something which you found it difficult to refuse, either in the way he asked you or what he asked you. So I wouldn't say it was a case of volunteering. It was more a case of, well.
But I think, as far as Bilton Grange was concerned, the high spot was when Donald Hilton, the moderator, opened the extension, and he preached in the evening, and he actually said that the province were thinking of closing Bilton Grange, but now it was doing very well and they were very encouraged. Now that meant something to me, that we'd saved a good church from some kind of despair.
When the extension was opened, they had a big thing for that, and the moderator came to open it, and Richard Case, being a stage magician, he'd set up a ribbon across the door to be cut, and of course he gave the moderator this pair of trick scissors that wouldn't close for him. Of course Richard Case could open and close them perfectly, but this guy, whatever he did, he wouldn't shut. Because it's typical of that kind of little bit of magic that Richard would slip in now and again. Unfortunately, one group wouldn't be around long enough to really appreciate the benefits. The 2nd Harrogate Boys Brigade Company met for the last time in mid-1995, after 10 years at the church. After 35 years as an elder, long-standing member Frank Coe retired from his post in 1996. He was secretary for 30 of those years, and was hugely active in the church. Amongst his many roles, he represented Bilton Grange at the Synod and churches together. A special lunch was held in his honour that July, to thank him for his many years of devoted service, along with his wife Mary, who was an active and long-standing member of the Ladies' Fellowship. Another party was held in 1996, this time a surprise one with West Park, to celebrate Reverend Richard Kay's 50th year in ministry. It was with sadness that a year later, in March 1997, Richard Kay's retired from the ministry, leaving a hole in the life of the church.
It was a changing congregation, that was the trouble, because like the Parkins and the Williams and others came in, new people came in after a little while, and some were very evangelical and others were a bit more fearful, a little more traditional. All I can say about the likes of the Coes and the Brendans and others, that they were very faithful, very loyal, very hard-working, and they were very supportive, even though they had some apprehensions about the things I wanted to do. And I think the spiritual life improved while we were there, and it was good. I've got to say that I was only there 6 years, but there were 6 happy years, and I still feel for the people there, and my heart is there quite often. And I could have gone on for another 5 years, really. And I did say to West Park, look, if the URC is poor, I'm prepared to do for nothing. But they had to stick to the rules, you see.
Bilton Grange United Reformed Church has, over the years, gained a reputation for inspiring people to go into the ministry. There have been more than 10, and many of those took up the call during Richard Kay's time with the church. Here, some of them tell how they were inspired.
I did feel the call, if that's the right word, in my teens, but I thought, no, it's not for me. And so I just ignored it, really. And then David went in the ministry, and that was fine, because I was quite happy to be a minister's wife. But then, when our family were in the teens, it came again much more strongly, and I thought, well, I've run out of excuses now. So it was go for it, Denise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you go to college for that?
Yes, I went to Manchester 4 years,
Right.
part-time. And it was assumed that when I finished I'd continue working with David, but it didn't work out that way.
Right.
So I was hospice chaplain for 16 years.
I became an elder, and for a time I led the youth club.
Right.
And then one day Wilf Wall said to me, "Have you thought of going in the ministry?" And I hadn't. I'd already got a place then at Loughborough College to train for teaching gymnastics and English. So then I did think about ministry, and decided to go into ministry. So that's how I became associated with Bilton Grange. First of many, I might say. First of many at Bilton Grange who went into the ministry.
Well, as I say, it was as a direct result of the Alpha. I was one of the leaders for Alpha, and at the end of it, you all come forward for prayer. And there was Pauline and a few others as well, all praying with me. And they sort of said, well, we feel God's calling you into ministry. So within the URC, I'm not sure if you're aware, but it takes a whole year, the process of interviews, going through the church and the synod and district and the weekend. So I prayed about it long and hard, but God's always nudging when that's what God wants. God nudges you and, you know, it doesn't go away. So I sort of said really, well, all right, God, if this is what you want, I will get through this process. And the rest is history really, because I did get through that process, and here I am, nearly 6 years on in ministry, and I just absolutely love it. I'm still as passionate today as I was when I first went in, and I'm just so privileged to be serving God in that way. And when I look at it, God's timing was just amazing, because, you know, the boys were older and they were at an age where I could leave them and go off to college for the training. And so everything was just sort of right and perfect timing. And
that was long before Bilton. I've always been heavily involved in the church, right from being little. I had about an 8-year gap where I suppose when you get married and you sort of move in house and all the rest of it, when I didn't really go except for on high days and holidays, but then I went back. And so I've always been very closely linked with faith and church and, you know, that sort of thing. But when I was, it would be in the 80s, and I went to Spring Harvest. I'd been on a few things, but I went to Spring Harvest, and I started to feel that God was calling me to do something. Didn't know what, and it's very hard to explain call. But I just had this inner feeling that I should be doing something, and I didn't know what. And I went on an Anglican renewal retreat, and while I was there, again this feeling was quite strong that, you know, I should be doing something, and again didn't know what. So when I came back, I spoke to Don, who was the vicar at the time at St John's, and he said, well, I should go on an inquirers conference. And I went to an inquirers conference, and the more and more as time went on, it began to feel that it was something full-time, not just part-time. And I did then student ministry at West Park, because they weren't happy with me doing student ministry in my own church, you see, so we did it in West Park. But all the time I was in college, I mean, I still always felt Bilton's my home, you know, Bilton's my home. And,
With all these people leaving, Bilton Grange was looking for a minister to arrive. This would be, after an 18-month interregnum, the Reverend Bob Heathcote.
When I was at college, Pauline was training at the same time as me, and you know, she sort of ate, slept, lived, breathed Bilton, so I knew about Bilton before I ever recognised the fact that there was a possibility of me coming to Bilton as minister. I mean, that wasn't really thought about until probably the last year of college, when we had to start to look, really. And in many ways I felt as if I knew of the church quite intimately, and it still didn't put me off. So But yes, I mean, obviously the vacancy was declared around about the time when I was starting to look for a church. And I hadn't set my objectives on coming to Yorkshire again, but I didn't dismiss it. I'm a northerner, I'm from Yorkshire, I've got a great love of being in Yorkshire. Harrogate isn't an area I knew particularly well, but it had an appeal and the opportunity arose. And so, yes, I suppose, to be honest, it's always difficult because you're always going to follow in somebody's shoes, whoever they are, and some people are always going to compare you, whether you like it or not. As far as I'm concerned, it didn't matter who it was, I was going to be compared with my predecessor for, one way or another. I tried for that not to be an issue, and I did not in any way try to walk in anybody else's footsteps. It was perhaps more difficult because Richard's still living in Harrogate, so therefore he hadn't actually moved away. He was still accessible, and that's always difficult, and it's not an ideal situation, but obviously in the circumstances it was appropriate. That's where he lived, and it was an unusual situation for Richard to be the minister in the first place. But I didn't really find it that much of a problem. In fact, there were times when I found it very helpful as well. So we made the most of the situation, but it didn't really stop me being who I am and trying to be as effective a minister as I could in my own right.
Bob would be the last minister to preside over the joint pastorate between Bilton Grange and West Park URCs. This came to an end quite quickly after Bob's departure.
I didn't find it that difficult, to be honest. I think the relationship between West Park and Bilton Grange at the time was very good. I didn't find a problem. I mean, there were different churches, and by and large were separate from each other. We had a slight link. We had a joint evening communion service initially, and then we broadened that to include the other URCs as well. But there was an element of support that each would give to the other. And I mean, Bilton certainly helped out with the contact centre. There was a full team, which was good to see that. And there was a time when West Park's elders came and helped Bilton through a difficult time. And also we borrowed Trevor Roberts for a time when we haven't got a treasurer. So I can recognise, there's times when the churches did work together well as a team. And of course I was between the two then, so to some extent you feel that rapport with both. And it's like having two children. If the children get on, then you feel happy about it. And I felt they got on. They were very different, but they still got on all right. I'm slightly saddened that the relationship between the two churches sort of disintegrated so quickly after I'd gone, but I have to say I did leave both churches exploring other possibilities, and that's possibly why that joint pastorate had to break up at that time. Both those other possibilities were worth exploring, with the Methodists in Bilton, with the Baptists in West Park.
August 1999 saw the first model railway exhibition held at Bilton Grange. Initiated by bus enthusiast Bob Heathcote, this is now a regular event at the church, and the local model railway club now meets regularly in the small hall. Their 2001 event was at the time the single biggest fundraising event the church had ever seen, raising £1,100. Bob's love of buses led to another series of events he is remembered for.
And I think Bob Heathcote he did an awful lot with the older people, the minibus trips, and was very good pastorally visiting and communion and things like that. So I think that was Bob's gifting when he was here.
And of course, when we had Bob Heathcote, I mean, he used to hire a coach every month and take the old people out, and we used to go out for the day, didn't we?
Drive round the country.
He always know somewhere where we could go for lunch, and we always enjoyed that. We miss him now, don't we?
Always ended up at
Ripley for ice cream.
The millennium came with its celebrations, and the outside of the building got a brand new look. 2 new signs, erected at either end of the building, announced Bilton Grange's presence to the world, along with 2 large white crosses. 2000 also saw the details in the stained glass window at the front of church repainted by Rosemary Oberheim, most notably the faces of the figures. Rosemary Oberheim is a long-serving member of Bilton Grange. She has served as an elder and as treasurer. Her artistic talent has been put to good use in the church over the years, from magazine illustrations to nativity donkeys, to stage backdrops and paintings. She has had a hand in many of the banners around the church, including the one celebrating the 75th anniversary of the church. The early 21st century saw a surge in the number of children attending the church, and in 2001 the Brownies were joined by the second Bilton Rainbows. They had been made homeless when Fountains Hall was demolished, and Bilton Grange welcomed them in. A pilots group was launched in 2003 and has gone from strength to strength.
Previous to pilots, Jill, myself and a few others had started a mother and toddler group. But as Hannah left the toddler group and went on to school and I was committed to my work at playgroup, we decided that we were no longer able to commit ourselves to the toddler group. So feeling guilty as we did, we decided that we would put our energies into a group for the older children. So we went up to Windermere and spent a weekend up there and looked a little bit more into how pilots could start within the church here. And it started just over 5 years ago. And we did a few taster sessions and it grew from there really, and we've had regular sort of 20-21 children every week.
And when Jack was about, must have been 6 or so, Bob was very keen to start pilots. Bob Heathcote was keen to start pilots, and it seemed like a big commitment, so we sort of dug our heels in for a bit and then decided that Heather, Isabel, Charlotte and myself decided to go for it. So, and that's how it started.
A change in personal circumstances and the opening of a new position in Sheffield's Central URC saw the Reverend Bob Heathcote move on from Bilton in 2004. Finding themselves without a minister, both Bilton Grange and West Park looked to what the future might hold and what was best for each. The joint pastorate was dissolved, and both churches began talks with other congregations in the town. Dwindling numbers in most of Harrogate's churches had prompted some of them to consider joining forces. For a time, Bilton Grange considered the prospect of joining forces with the Methodist Church. However, this issue split the congregation, with both sides holding strong views. Eventually, a joint pastorate was re-established with Bilton's old bedfellow, Knaresborough URC. With there being so few URC ministers in the district, and a lot of churches to cover, it was decided by the synod that a joint pastorate between these two churches was a sensible, practicable idea. In January 2008, the Reverend Bob Jones took up the post of minister at both Knaresborough and Bilton Grange URCs. He is the 11th person to hold the position at the current building, and the 14th since the congregation was founded in 1906.
Well, obviously that's attached to the call to Knaresborough. Yeah. And that occurred in 2005, I think it was, when we were actually, I was on sabbatical, and we came to spend the weekend at Knaresborough. And on the Sunday, we went to Knaresborough URC, and we just wanted to kind of go there, worship, and just be quiet, pew fodder, you know, just. But the minister recognised me. But just prior to that, he had said during the service that last week he said I gave, as you know, I gave him my resignation, and it was at that moment that both Anne and I knew that we were called to Knaresborough. Right. And as you know, there's a lot of discussion has to go on to arrange a church profile, and then that has to go out to any prospective minister. Right. Well, all in all, that took about 2.5 years. Right. So we were kind of really disciplined. We had to be really strong on discipline and on prayer, and to keep focused that that's where God actually wanted us to be. Right. And when the actual profile did come through, we saw that the Bilton profile was actually attached to it. Right. And that was a great joy. And so we feel we're twice blessed. No, not at all. I just thought, I've said to people, I've never come into church where love is almost tangible. I think it's wonderful the way people care for one another. Yeah, it's really good. That was my first impression.
The arrival of a new minister and the celebration of the building's 80th year would seem the perfect time for the congregation to take stock and consider who they are, what they do, and where they come from. Who are the members of Bilton Grange United Reformed Church, and how did they come to be there?
Or not.
Or not. Well, when you did.
Oh, we did. Well, at first start we were looking for a church that was near our house. So of course, yeah, our house to be, and so we moved here and thought we'll have a look round. And as we're not great, Anglicans, we were looking around for a church that wasn't necessarily an Anglican church, but we were looking for one that was friendly, within walking distance, and we thought we'd just try some churches that were around here.
I came here with Mrs. Elsie Blackburn the first time here, and since after that, in 02, yeah, and then I think I like here because the people very friendly, yes, and very warm welcome here, and also when you come here you feel your feeling, I mean my feeling, I think I'm really happy here, yeah.
Well, I personally came around about 1944, 45, when I was a youngster. I came to the Sunday school. It was then Bilton Methodist Church. It was, when Harry, the oldest of the three, was christened here. But actually Laura had also started here, going to pilots and coming into church. She's an older granddaughter. Grandchild number 6, isn't she? Yeah. And that was what started us coming back. You know, we'd often contemplated it, but you do these things. You think, I'm going to start going back to church, and then something turns up on the Sunday, and you go off somewhere else, and think, I'll definitely go start something. But we never got around to it until we actually came down with Laura and the pilots, and then with the christening of Harry, and we found it so friendly. We found the atmosphere so comfortable, and everybody made you welcome. And
spring 2002 when we first came, because we wanted a church that was handy, local, with a minister, and with a building. The other church we were at met in the school and didn't have its own building, so that's why we came the first place. And it had all those three things.
Even though it was only part-time minister?
Yeah, it had a part-time minister, it had a building, and it was within walking distance.
Members were asked what they thought the church's strengths and weaknesses were. What does Bilton Grange do well? Where does it need improvement? What does it need?
I think one of our strengths is we try hard. We've even in adversity we try and keep going, and we try and bring new people into the church to know Christ, and that's what we want to do, even though we find it very difficult. But I think that's our weakness, because we haven't got the resources or the people to do it. So I think that's a strength and a weakness that we have to work at, and hopefully this is what God will help us to do. Now he's come along. Because I think he's...
Where do we excel? I think we're very good on the home front as far as food goes. If there's ever a do going, we tend to provide all this wonderful food. Homemade, a lot of our things are homemade. But I think, again, it's that community spirit feel. It's that coming together, sharing. And it is good, I think, for the community to have that feel about it. But weaknesses, don't really think we've got any weaknesses. We are just like a family. We have ups and downs. We have not many, but we do have disagreements. But when you're in a family of God, everything's done with love. So we get over it and we battle on and we soldier on. But like I said, you know, we are just a big family.
It would be nice to get more people coming on a regular basis.
Having said that, most churches are, congregations are going down, but I find at this church, where people have passed on or left, there's usually be someone coming in to take the places, so there must be something good going on.
Yeah.
The strong points, gosh. Everybody needs somebody in their time, even if they're on their own, and there's always somebody for you in that church. If you need somebody, there is somebody there for you. It's getting better because it's a small group, which makes it more of a family group. I find that quite a strong point. Sometimes if you're going to a large church with a large congregation, you tend to be slightly overwhelmed.
I guess like the main thing about our church is the informal way that it puts itself across to you, and it can suit both sides. If people want to be highbrow about the church, there's a niche for that, and if you want to go a little bit, you know, rock and rollish, almost, it can also cater for that a small band of those people.
A sense of humour is necessary in every walk of life, and laughter is never very far away.
One of my favourite stories to tell is about my son Hank. He, in the church that I grew up in, children are allowed to take communion, so that's been something different that I've experienced in this church. So my children think that everyone can accept communion. You don't have to be an adult, you don't have to be confirmed or have a holy first communion. And Hank was taking communion one Sunday, and it was really the first time that he had participated where it had really clicked what it was. And he was beside me, and Karen Brown was administering the communion that day, and she held out the tray of bread, and Hank, of course, I knew he would go for the biggest piece on the tray, and it was the part that the preacher had broken, and it was there on the tray, the part that you're not supposed to accept. So he just bypassed all these small pieces that had been meticulously cut and went straight for the biggest piece. I grabbed his wrist, let go. And Karen Brown, she got tickled, and so she had to, of course, serve everyone else, and she was still laughing about that. And then, after the bread was finished, then she was bringing the wine around, the blood around, which is what Hank was calling it. He was calling it blood, and he speaks very loudly, and everybody's quite reverent during the communion service. And he was saying, "Is this blood? Is this real blood? Is this real blood?" And he was really hesitant about taking it, but he took it and drank it immediately, even though he'd expressed some reservation. Drank it in one fell swoop, and then he said, "Oh, that was good. Can I have some more?" And to Karen before she left, and of course she's laughing again then as she went through administering the wine.
It's also Karen, when she was a wee tot as well. We were at a concert with Mr. Toombs, who's a bass baritone, I think that's what you could call him. A beautiful, very, very deep voice. And we were on the front row, just 3 yards off Mr. Toombs when he was singing his solo. And Karen looked at me. I had a very big voice, remember? And we were very close to him, and Karen looked up at me and she says, "What a noise." And I said, "Shh, it's not a noise, it's a beautiful voice." Because she'd constantly been told to keep quiet and not say anything in church, you know, you had to be quiet and respectful.
This truly is a remarkable little church, with a steadfast and loyal congregation, who have stuck together through all the world has thrown at them. They have seen severe hardship and times of plenty, deep sorrows and true joy, and through it all they have held fast to those Christian principles that are the bedrock of Bilton Grange's very existence: service, witness and prayer.
I enjoyed being at Bilton Grange United Reformed Church. It's a nice little friendly church. Come and join us.
Prayer. Prayer, prayer, prayer. If you're not talking to the man, you may as well be a social club. Prayer, prayer, prayer. First, bottom, end. Otherwise you run around like headless chickens, just doing, and then you wear yourselves out, and there's nothing at the end of it.
I would like to seriously pray that the Holy Spirit comes into this place, shakes us all up, makes every single one of us realise that we have got something to give and that we can do it, but we need His help and we need a true faithfulness.
Bilton Grange to me is, and I'm saying this because I mean it, not because I'm being filmed for an anniversary, but Bilton is very special. It's for a relatively small church, it's got a remarkable amount of energy.
Actually, I like to go on camera as saying that I think we've got some wonderful people in this church, and that those people are committed to the church, to seeing God's kingdom grow and people come to Jesus. And I just think we're backing a winner, so to speak. So that's where I'd like to say to camera that I'm really looking forward to working with the people and to getting them to bring others in, so that we can grow.
These indomitable Christians have created a legacy of love, service and dedication that is as strong now as it was at the birth of the church. Let us just pray that we can take that forward into a bright future.